Ready to go.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this celebration of Stem Cell Awareness Day. I'm Kevin McCormack. I'm the Director of Patient Advocacy at the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, or CIRM. I'm going to be your host and moderator tonight. We have a great panel of people here who are going to join us in a few moments and talk about various aspects of CIRM over the last few years, and I'm looking forward. We have the chairman of our board, Dr. Jonathan Thomas, and he's going to look at what CIRM has achieved so far. Then we'll have Dr. Lisa Cadike from our therapeutics team. Lisa's going to look at our clinical portfolio, what we've done, and obviously kind of some of the issues that we're hoping to explore in the future. Then we'll have Dr. Kelly Shepard from our science programs team. And Kelly's going to talk about the education programs that we fund. And then last but by no means least, we'll have Dr. Mitra Hushman, who's going to look towards the future. Mitra played a huge role in putting together our new strategic plan, which lays out a groundwork for the next 5 years for CIRM. So each will do a brief presentation. And then at the end of that, we'll be open to questions. And so feel free to use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to post questions. And we'll try and get to as many of those as we can in the time we have available. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Thomas. JT, you're up.
Good evening, everybody. Kevin, if you could put the slides up there, please. Thank you so much for spending a bit of your evening here with us. We hope that this is both interesting, enlightening, and fun above all, and that we get into a lot of what CIRM does and to help give you a better understanding of how we work and all the great work that we enable throughout the state. Kevin, first slide, please. Is it possible to make that larger? There we go. So with every presentation, we always start with our mission, which, though short, believe it or not, took quite a while to formulate. We wanted to make sure we got all the words just right to get across a message that maximally captured everything that we are about. So our mission is accelerating world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. Next slide, please. So you may recall the CIRM saga began with the passage of Prop 71 in 2004, which created the agency. It made the right to do embryonic stem cell research something that is etched in the California Constitution. And importantly, it authorized $3 billion of state general obligation bond money to use to make grants to academic institutions, research institutions, and biotech companies across the state of California. The latter clause there is very important because since it is taxpayers' dollars that is paying for all of this, there must be a nexus between all that we fund and the projects that we do and the money. So as you can see there in the middle, Prop 71 owed its passage largely to the tremendous support from patient advocates, foundations dealing with many different types of diseases. They were huge proponents, and with their support, that measure passed 59-41. It needed 50% plus one. So CIRM, as you can see in the middle, has become a funder, a partner with different collaborations that we've set up, which we'll get into a bit later. An accelerator, which means we help to get the research funded in a way that proceeds more quickly and gets through the research continuum at the fastest pace we can, while the researchers are paying strict attention to detail and safety and everything else. And then de-risker, which is sort of a weird word, what that means is the early stages of stem cell research are the most risky because if you're putting money out there, You don't know what it's going to yield at the end of the day until you get further and further on in, where each step is progressively more promising. So we sort of exist to fund research in the very early stages, early to middle stages of the research continuum, at which point companies come in and they then seek funding, they in-license many of the projects, they spin out other projects, et cetera, and they ultimately take projects on through clinical trials and on to commercialization. We fund 3 different stages of research. Basic, which as it sounds is the earliest stages to get a good handle on the biological underpinnings of the particular condition that we're looking for and to identify potential therapeutic candidates to treat them. Translational, which means once we've so identified, we then take the projects through to where they're hopefully approved to proceed with clinical trials. And then clinical, which is, as it sounds, the clinical trial phases 1 and 2 principally when it gets to the clinical trial process. We also have infrastructure and education programs. Kelly's going to talk a lot about education, infrastructure. All I'm going to say on that is in the early days, we needed to build a number of stem cell facilities across the state and did so. We have 12 that are either freestanding or rehabbed existing space, typically at medical schools. And those are state of the art and allow for best in class research across the board. We ran out of our first $3 billion, which is a pretty amazing statement, in 2020, and went back on the ballot, as you recall, in November of 20, and were re-upped to the tune of an additional $5.5 billion, which should hold CIRM and have it going anywhere from the next 10 to 15 years. Next slide, please. Proposition 14, just a few notes on that, because Prop 71 was so comprehensive, but Prop 14 added a few things to it. First of all, it was approved by almost 8.6 million California voters, which is an extraordinary number, and it shows the level of confidence that the voting public has in what we do and in the science we enable. As I mentioned, additional $5.5 billion was authorized. There were a few changes and new requirements. For example, Prop 14 specifically called out $1.5 billion to be dedicated to diseases of the brain and the CNS. And then it also built on existing programs that we had and added a few tweaks to make them bigger and better. Next slide, please. Very quickly, a few numbers of note. 2004, Prop 71 passed. 2020, the additional $5.5 billion through Prop 14. 1,100 plus transformative programs that we have funded to date. That's a lot of grants, and they vary in size from seed capital all the way up to, in the earlier stages, we had awards that went up to $20 million, which in the world of medical research is pretty much astronomical. We've now funded 82 clinical trials across a wide spectrum of diseases, from common disease such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, neurological disorders, all the way down to a number of rare or so-called orphan diseases. In these clinical trials that we funded, we have over 3,200 patients have enrolled, which is a number we're very proud of and will be dramatically increasing over time. And then one of the things we try to do is to make it so when we fund something, other parties who are interested and our stakeholders will want to add their funding to the mix. And we call that leveraging CIRM funding. And that can come in a variety of ways, whether it's entities that get grants providing what they call co-funding from other sources. It could be from venture capital. It could be from private equity raises. It could be from IPOs. It could be from acquisitions, et cetera. But the takeaway is that we've had $23 billion in leveraged funds above and beyond what we've put out, which is also an extraordinary number and indicative of the promise of what all of our wonderful scientists are doing. Next slide, please. Very quickly, you can see in the Prop 71 and Prop 14 era, how many projects we've funded in the discovery, translation, clinical, education, and infrastructure categories. I won't name the numbers, you can see them there. I will note one thing that you'll find interesting, that as we were waiting for the ballot measure in 2020 and didn't know if we were going to have any funding or not going forward, we had very little left. And we made a decision in March of 20 that that money we did have left should go to COVID-related projects, because as you will well recall, that was the time when the whole world was kicking in on joining and figuring out different scientific approaches to the pandemic. And so we ended up funding a number of projects over the summer of 2020, and even though it was small in dollar amount by our terms, we were very proud of that, because we mobilized and put this whole COVID project process in place from scratch and had all these awards out within about 3 months. Next slide, please. Okay, let's see. All right, well, I sort of touched on this a bit. Prop 14, new programs. One of the big issues as the treatments are working their way through to approval, which is going to take a fair bit of time, there are two major issues that stem from that. One is how to make all CIRM-funded treatments and cures accessible to all Californians, and then how to make them affordable. And those are two sort of very different and challenging things. So there was a working group established to treat those two, which got started earlier in the year under Vice Chair Senator Torres and 10 other outside experts that bring different elements of expertise to the table in these two areas, and myself and 5 other patient advocate members of our board. So this is a major undertaking. Expand the scope of research. I mentioned the $1.5 billion, and then we have it set up so that when we fund projects, if they were to generate revenues down the road, those revenues would come in the form of royalties, and CIRM pre-negotiates a percentage of those royalties that comes back as a result of our funding, and Prop 14 earmark those for the accessibility and affordability efforts. Next slide, please. Okay, then I think we're getting towards the end of mine. I'll go quickly here. So our clinical trial programs are affected under something called our alpha stem cell clinics, which are spread out as we speak at a number of institutions throughout the state. And they are very notably part of a network which shares information and a variety of other things that create economies of scale and knowledge sharing that facilitates the accelerated process that we discussed earlier. Prop 14 mandates an extension of those, which are community care centers of excellence, which will be places that you have trials going in areas where you don't have med schools and academic institutions in various parts throughout the state. That's going to get rolled out next year. We have training and fellowship programs that are extensions of what Prop 71 mandated that we haven't had for the last few years, but have now geared them back up. We also had something called shared labs in the early days, which are labs that institutions that don't have stem cell programs per se can use to be part of a shared lab network, funding for the community care centers of excellence, the accessibility and affordability working group, and then the last line that there's certain research funding for that allocated as well. Next slide, please. Okay, well, that's it for me. It's kind of a whirlwind, lots of stuff to go over, but as you can see, we've been able to do a lot over the last now 18 years. We're extremely proud of that and are very, very proud to be doing this in lockstep with all of you who have been stakeholders and interested parties throughout. So thank you very much.
Thank you, JT. It's always hard trying to cram in 18 years into a few minutes, but great job there. Next up, we're going to go with Dr. Lisa Cadike, who's the Associate Director of our Therapeutics team, and Lisa's going to talk about clinical trials. Lisa, you're muted.
Yes, yeah, I'm working on it. They're okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Every day.
You can see my slides okay?
Yes, they're good.
Okay, great. So thanks. I'm going to give you also a little bit of a whirlwind tour, sort of a snapshot of some of our exciting clinical trials that we funded. And first, just to give you a bird's eye view, we have we funded to date since 2004, when Serum was first started, 82 different clinical trials, and that's as of this month. And the point of this slide here is really just to emphasize a couple points. One is that we fund all kinds of different diseases and disorders, as you can see on this pie chart here, everything from cancer to neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and lots of different blood disorders. So we're pretty agnostic to disease as long as it can be treated with a stem cell approach or a gene therapy approach. And we also do fund many different types of therapies. Our focus is primarily on cell and gene therapy, but we also do fund antibody and small molecules if they can be shown to target an endogenous stem cell within the body to mediate the regenerative effect. And so that's just the high level view of what we fund in the clinical trial stage. And I'll just briefly mention this again. JT mentioned that we have this Alpha Clinics network, and I wanted to highlight this also just because in addition to funding the trials, we have set up this network at major medical centers throughout California, and they really do specialize in cell and gene therapy treatments, which can differ quite a bit from more the traditional antibody and small molecule treatments that hospitals are used to giving to patients. There can be differences in administration and follow-up. And we want to be sure that, patients do receive these treatments at centers that have the highest standards of research. And these have been very successful clinics. And in fact, as JT mentioned, we're expanding. We're hoping to expand this network. There's a recent call to expand this network, so we may be able to add some more sites to this map in the future. But I just today want to highlight a couple of different clinical trials. One is a cell therapy and one is a gene therapy. And these are two that I picked because I think they're quite exciting and we have some early data for them. And the first is the cellular therapy, which is for a treatment for spina bifida. Spina bifida is a birth defect, and the problem is that the spinal cord doesn't close normally before birth. So even in the uterus here, you can see that this is a diagram with the baby's spinal cord is open in this place. And that means that all the neurons that are developing there could be damaged by exposure to the environment. And typically, patients that are born with spina, this defect often have leg paralysis, they can't walk, and have lack of control of urination and bowel movements. So it's pretty debilitating, lifelong disability. And so Dr. Diana Farmer at UC Davis has worked on this for many years. And let's go back first. So she showed quite some time ago, over a decade ago, she did a trial showing that if you detect this in utero, this defect, you can go in and actually do surgery in the uterus to repair the defect. And it was a pretty groundbreaking trial at the time because she found that it enabled many of the patients who were surgically repaired to walk, which was really, and it's now the standard of care to do this in utero surgery. However, not all the patients can walk. There's still almost half of them that couldn't walk. And so Diana's idea was to add on to this surgical treatment by applying a membrane that's seeded with placental stem cells over the spinal cord when they're doing the surgical repair. And the idea here is that those stem cells are secreting growth factors and anti-cell death factors that could basically rescue those cells that might otherwise have died, and enable a better outcome in the end. And so that was her idea, and she's been funded by Serum in now 3 different awards, starting with this early research. And of course, before you go into patients with something like this, you have to do 2 things preclinically, which is, one, to show that it works, and second of all, show that it's safe. And so she did both of those things using Serum funding. The sheep experiment was what she used to show that it worked. And this is where they did fetal surgery on sheep that had these defects in the spinal cord in utero, and repaired them with this stem cell seeded on the membrane. And you can see in this picture, lamb number 2 got the stem cell on the membrane treatment, and lamb number 1 did not. And lamb number 1 cannot walk. And she did this, showed reproducibly for every lamb that was treated with this product could walk. It was a really amazing preclinical data. And she also did work to show that this was safe. And that enabled her to then ask the FDA if she could do a clinical trial with this in actual human patients. And so she did that. And once the FDA said yes, she applied to Serum for more funding. This was right around the time when we were running out of our first $3 billion. But she got some of that money. And I just messed up my slide. Okay, where is it? Okay. There we go. That's the slide I wanted. So the FDA did give her permission to conduct this trial, and that trial is underway at UC Davis right now. So far, she's treated 3 patients. Everything has gone extremely smoothly. There's been no safety issues at all. And I'm showing here a picture of the first patient, the brave first patient who was treated, mom Emily and baby Robbie. The good news, it's very early to say if this is really working, because really the ultimate test will be if these babies can walk. However, there are definitely early signs that this is promising. The babies are kicking, and we can't make any. We don't want to say anything too definitive, but we're very excited to see how this turns out. So stay tuned on that one. The next one I just want to go through with you is the gene therapy approach, and this is being led by Dr. Stephanie Shirky at UC San Diego. And this is for a single gene defect that causes a disease called cystinosis. And mutations in this gene, the CTNS gene, cause defects in cellular metabolism that leads to organ damage. And there's certain organs that are particularly sensitive, including the kidney and the cornea. So these patients suffer from chronic kidney disease, vision problems. They also have muscle wasting and ended up with a shortened lifespan. And so Dr. Shirky's idea was to isolate blood stem cells from the patients and then insert a normal copy of the CTNS gene into those stem cells and then reinfuse the stem cells back into the patient, where the stem cells reconstitute a whole new blood system. and see if that could fix this problem. And just as for Dr. Farmer, she needed to, before going into patients, see, does it work and is it safe? And she did both those things. She showed that in a mouse model that blood stem cells carrying the normal gene can actually rescue all the defects that the mouse cystinosis disease, including preservation of the kidney and the eye and the thyroid. And she also did those extensive safety and tumorigenicity studies in mice, and so no safety issues. So like Dr. Farmer, she asked the FDA, can I do a clinical trial? And they gave her permission. So we are also funding that trial. It's in progress. It's been in progress for a while. It's actually nearly completed at UC San Diego. She's treated 5 patients so far. And I actually forgot to mention one of the the treatment for cystinosis that exists is less than ideal, shall we put it. So the patients have to take more than 50 doses of a pill round the clock. They have to get up at all hours of the night to make sure they take this medication. And it causes body odor, and it still doesn't prevent the disease from progressing. It just slows it down. It's really a horrible disease. And in these patients that she's treated so far, none of them have to take this medication anymore. And they've all shown clinical improvements in multiple tissues, including the eyes and the skin and the intestine and the brain. And I just show a picture here of again, her brave first patient, Jordan, who is now completed. He's off the trial now, but he's had really dramatic improvements since being on the trial. And we're hoping that it will go on to the next phase, and really be on its way to approval eventually. Of course, they need to confirm with some more patients, but it's been a very exciting journey for this trial as well. So with that, I'm going to end my show, and we can talk later for questions. So let me stop sharing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up is Dr. Kelly Shepard. She's the Associate Director of Scientific Programs, which covers a lot of the early basic research. But Kelly's going to talk to us tonight about the education programs that she's been spearheading and making so successful. Kelly.
Thank you. Doug, were you going to operate my slides for me? Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to be continuing the trend with the Whirlwind Tour today, but my focus will be on a little bit different aspect of our mission, which is our Serum education programs. Next slide, please. So, of course, JT introduced you to our mission, and he described each of the major investments or pillars of funding through which Serum tries to address and achieve our mission. And Dr. Cadike just presented some exciting results that have emerged from the clinical pillar, which is the one on the far right. Of course, the pillar I'm going to focus on right now is our education pillar, which is the second to the left. And the education pillar is actually the very first place where Serum made an investment following the passage of Proposition 71. Next slide, please. So how does education and training fit into Serum's mission? Well, they're absolutely core to it. All of these results and exciting outcomes and new ideas that are being tested through our research and development pipeline, well, somebody's doing that research, and it requires scientists at the leadership level, at the technician level, and at the trainee level, which vary from early education as undergraduates or in community colleges, all the way through graduate school and even postdoctoral and clinical education. So on the left, I'm showing that trainees themselves contribute very valuable research and insights that drive scientific progress and innovation. They're the ones in the labs testing and coming up with new hypotheses and ideas and generating the engine of the pipeline of discovery that begins its journey towards eventually a clinical trial and a treatment. Trainees, while they're actually doing innovation and discovery while in the training process itself, They, of course, eventually finish their training programs and they go on and bring these new skills where they are applied and adapted to meet the challenges of tomorrow and to make the regenerative medicine solutions and discoveries of today a reality. And finally, on the right, creating opportunities for all. It's very important that our workforce is diverse and inclusive, because this brings very valuable and needed perspectives so that the discoveries are more applicable to all the populations that are in California around the world. And these diverse perspectives actually improve the science as well as the delivery of these potential solutions. So when I go into the training programs, although you won't hear a little bit more about the diversity and equity and inclusion principles until later in our presentation tonight, I just want everybody to understand that that is woven into the fabric of everything we do. Thank you. Next slide. So this is a slide that's showing the 4 major currently active research and training programs that we have at CIRM. The one over on the left is our SPARK program, and I'm going to go over into a little bit more detail of this in just a minute, but this is focused on training at the high school level. We have our Bridges program, which is spanning across the top. This is a series of programs that support education at associate degree, bachelor's, and master's level. And over on the right, we have our CIRM Scholars Program, which supports training at the predoctoral, postdoctoral, and clinical level. These 3 programs have been long-standing. They all started under Proposition 71. In fact, the CIRM Scholars Program was that very first program supported under Proposition 71 back in 2006 that I mentioned. The Bridges program has been going continuously for 13 and a half years now, and the SPARK program started in about 2012. The 4th program, the Compass program, which supports undergraduate level education, is a brand new program that was specifically designed and has begun to be supported under Proposition 14. So I'm going to go into just a little bit of a detail about all of these programs next. Keeping in mind that since many of these programs have been going on for a long time, there's a lot that I can't cover. So this will be a really high-level view. I'm happy to answer any additional or more specific questions after the end of our presentations. Next slide, please. Beginning with the SPARK program. So this is our program that supports research internships for the summer for high school students. The goal is to provide these diverse high school students with hands-on training experiences in stem cell gene therapy research while inspiring their interest in regenerative medicine. This program provides students with preparatory courses and workshops that they can do together. They have activities where they interact with patients to understand the perspective of those patients. They participate in social media and outreach projects in order to teach them to be good communicators and to help explain the science and the importance of their research to their communities. And finally, of course, the summer research internship, which is the hallmark of this program. At the conclusion of the summer, students from the 11 SPARK programs around the state are all convened for a special day where they present their research to one another on posters. Some of them give oral presentations as well. And in generally celebrate and network and talk about what they want to do next. Next slide, please. The second program I'm going over is our Bridges program. This is our longest continually operating program, 13 and a half years now. There are 15 different programs around the state. Some of them support certificate programs, some of them support undergraduate, and some of them are master's programs. So the general goal of Bridges is to provide diverse students for highly productive careers in stem cell or gene therapy research and development programs. An interesting fact about our Bridges programs is they are based at state universities and community colleges around California. In particular, state universities and community colleges that do not have their own federally funded stem cell regenerative infrastructure, no medical schools, no big federal dollars to support research. So the reason this is called a bridge program is because it's going to provide opportunities for these students at these teaching colleges to obtain that world-class research experience. So the way it works is these students take specialized curricula and workshops that is specific to their home institution, which are these state universities and community colleges. They all get some advanced cell culture techniques course provided by, in general, an external, it's been provided by an external source. And the hallmark of these programs is the full-time paid internships for, in many cases, up to 1 full year in these world-class regenerative medicine host laboratories. What are host laboratories? These are the research-intensive universities that have stem cell and regenerative medicine infrastructure. The UCs, Stanford, just to name a few, places that have medical schools, and in some cases, and more recently, biotech companies that have a regenerative medicine focus can also host these interns. As with our other training programs, these students participate in patient engagement activities to help understand the patient perspective and community outreach to help them communicate the value of what they do to their communities. They also are convened for an annual Bridges conference. As you can see in this picture on the right, this is from our recent conference, which was held in San Diego. That's the San Diego State University program that you see in that picture. It was the first time we were able to meet in person in a few years. So it was a very exciting event this year. Next slide, please. The third program is our research training, or nicknamed the Serum Scholars Program. This is a program that started in 2006 and was active through 2017. And then it became dormant until we were able to relaunch this under the Proposition 14 program. This is a program that prepares a diverse cadre of scientists with the knowledge and skills that they're going to need to lead effective stem cell gene therapy programs, whether they become leaders in academia, professors, or whether they become leaders or principal investigators in companies. This program targets pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, and or clinical fellows at 18 different California-based research institutions. They provide specialized courses and workshops and ethics training. These programs support 2 to 3 year laboratory appointments for each trainee. These trainees also receive patient engagement and community outreach activities to help them become stem cell ambassadors and understand the perspective of the people that they're eventually will benefit from treatments. And they also are funded to attend scientific conferences where they can network and share the results of their research with their peers. And next slide, please. Last but not least, a brand new program that we are launching this year. In fact, the grants were awarded at the end of August, and these programs are starting up right now. It's called the Compass Program, which is to support undergraduate students around the state. It prepares diverse undergraduate students for a variety of careers in regenerative medicine. So not necessarily those that are have decided that they want to be leaders someday, but people who are interested in being technicians or even learning to apply their research skills in other directions. The main innovation around this program is that the leaders of these programs are tasked with creating novel recruitment and novel support mechanisms that will identify and foster untapped talent, help reach those perspectives that are underrepresented in our STEM community and field, and bring those very valuable and needed perspectives into the workforce. So this program consists of kind of 3 major components. One is the strategic outreach and recruitment component, which are innovating around the recruitment mechanisms to identify the untapped talent and encourage them to join the program. The second component is a mentorship program. There's a very strong mentoring component to this because students who are identified for this program will need support and we want to make sure anyone coming through this program feels included and can see themselves as a scientist and receives the encouragement and support that is needed so that their perspectives can contribute to our future workforce. And finally, the trainees themselves who are enrolled in bachelor's degree programs, they will receive foundational and specialized courses and workshops. And by specialized courses, we even have 2 new Compass programs that are specializing around cell manufacturing, which is a very, very needed skill set in the workforce as more and more cell therapies, such as the ones Dr. Cadike described, get closer and closer to becoming something that will be a reality for more people. These programs provide paid research internships, usually summer internships, patient engagement and community outreach, and cohort activities and professional development for the students. And of course, the mentorship and career counseling are essential to this program. Next slide, please. So in the many years that these programs have been active, there have been a lot of alumni that have come out. And I just want to this is a really, really high level summary of some of the outcomes and impact of this program. We could literally spend an hour talking about all the exciting things that have happened. But as you can see from my slide, there are already over 3,300 students that have come through one of these training programs. And that's to date. And we expect several hundred more to come through in the next few years. In our high school program, we now have over 200 participating high schools in the state whose students are enrolling and completing Spark programs. We have over 500 participating scientific mentors who are providing training in their laboratories. And these laboratories include over 70 different sites. This is both academic research institutions, for-profit and nonprofit research institutions, and biotechnology companies. Trainees have contributed to over 1,350 scientific publications. For our Bridges program, which has been the longest running one, we have been able to track a number of the alumni, and we find that just almost a third of them continue to pursue their education following their Bridges program through graduate school or PhD programs or other professional degrees. About 62% of the Bridges alumni go into employment following their graduation from the Bridges program. And this is nearly equally distributed between academic laboratories and biotech laboratories. And if you go into other types of health professions as well. For our high school students, many of them are still in college. However, those that have graduated and enrolled in schools, for those we are able to track, we can share that the vast majority of them have chosen to pursue STEM majors in college. Just the pie chart on the right just shows a distribution of these 33 alumni that I've talked about. You can see about half of them are actually graduated from undergraduate or master's level programs, about 25% from our leadership level training, and about just a little under 25% through our high school program. Next slide, please. So I just gave you a lot of facts and figures, but before I end, I just want to show you a couple of faces behind these facts and figures. So this is just a snapshot, just 3 of the many Bridges alumni, and where I'm showing the slide to illustrate the different types of directions that their Bridges training career paths have taken. Over on the left is Nicole Renee Sparks, who was a Bridges student at Cal State University San Bernardino. She did her research internship at UC Riverside in 2011 to 2012, and she was recently hired as an assistant professor at UC Irvine. In the middle is Elizabeth Benz, who received a master's degree from our Cal Poly San Luis Obispo Bridges program. This is a program that focuses on internships, in many cases in biotechnology labs. And Elizabeth did her internship at a company you may have heard of called ViaCyte, which is a pioneer in human embryonic stem cell derived therapy for type 1 diabetes. While she was there, she learned about process engineering, which is related to manufacturing of a cell therapy. After receiving that training and completing her program, she has moved on to become a senior product development engineer at another biotechnology company you may have heard of called Illumina. And over on the right is Candida Toribio, who was a Bridges student at our Pasadena City College Bridges program. She did her internship at USC in 2016 and 17. After completing her Bridges program, she went into a master's business program and received training in project management. And she actually came back and joined Serum and is the project manager of the team that I am a participant of. And she keeps us all in line every day. Next slide, please. And finally, just a quick snapshot of our oldest CERM training program, the CERM Scholars Program. So here are a couple of alumni from that from way back in the day. Derek Rossi over on the left, who some of you may have heard of, he was in the inaugural training grant program. He did his postdoctoral research at Stanford University in the Weissman Lab, moved on and became a faculty member at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, and he went on to become a bio-entrepreneur and is a co-founder of Moderna, where some of the mRNA technology that he developed went into vaccine development that helped address the COVID pandemic. In the middle is Matthew Blurton Jones, who was a postdoc in the LaFerla lab and around the same time frame, 2006, 2007, shortly after the passage of Proposition 71. He has now moved his way up the tenure chain and is an associate professor at UC Irvine. Not only has he achieved tenure there, but he has independently obtained 3 CERM research grants in our discovery stage program, and he's the principal investigator on 1 currently and 2 that closed a few years ago. And finally, on the right is Orcadea Garcia. She was a postdoctoral fellow in the Driscoll Lab at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles from 2013 to 15. She is now at Johnson & Johnson, where she's the research fellow and technical lead for their 3D printing and tissue regeneration focus. Next slide, please. So that concludes my vignettes about our education and training programs. This is just a quick recap slide that shows our 4 ongoing and active programs. The number of trainees or alumni that have come through these programs are shown in white, and the number of additional trainees that we expect to complete their education and potentially join the workforce or move on to higher education are indicated in the green numbers below. So maybe in another few years, I'll tell you a story and we'll have even more to talk about. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. As I did mention, there wasn't time for me to go into a lot of details, but if you'd like to learn more about our training programs, you can visit our website at the link there. There's also many, many stories of individuals who have come through our training programs, videos where they talk about their experience and how it impacted them. They're on the Serum Stem Celler blog. Just search for Spark or search for Bridges, and those stories will come up right away. These stories are very inspiring and make all of us very proud of how we're contributing to their future education and workforce development. And if you have any other questions, we can be reached at the email address shown below. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, Kelly. I think when we started the programs, we always talked about we're going to be training the next generation of researchers and scientists. And I think what Kelly has kind of explained to us and shown us is that that's exactly what's happening when you see how well so many of the former students have done, whether it's in the Spark or the Bridges program. And obviously now we have other programs coming up. So thanks, Kelly. That was fascinating. Next up is Dr. Mitra Hushman, who is a senior science officer in special projects. Mitra was really responsible for shaping the future, helping shape the future of the agency. She really kind of helped mastermind a lot of the work that went into shaping the strategic plan, which is a 5-year blueprint for where we're going to be going over in the coming future. So, Mitra, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thanks everyone for being here. I hate to be the person between you and dinner, but hopefully I can give you a flavor of what STERM has in store for the next 5 years. It's also really nice. It's an honor to be on this side working at STERM. I remember I was a grad, and I'm dating myself here, but I was a grad student when Stem Cell Awareness Day was first conceived, and here we are still celebrating it, and it's amazing to see what STERM has been able to accomplish. And like I said, it's the goal of what we're discussing in my portion is to show you some of our strategic priorities, none of which would have been possible without the help of many of the patient advocates. I saw a lot of familiar names as I was scrolling through the attendees, and those people who really took the Herculean effort I'd like to consider myself as a part of them too. We really tried, worked hard to make sure that STERM continues and can continue to make a huge impact as it has been. And the talks that you saw before me hopefully have convinced you of the level of impact that STERM has had on both workforce development and patients. And that's just one snapshot of it all. So let me tell you a little bit about our strategic priorities. You have already gotten a little bit of a flavor of this from the slides that Kelly, Dr. Shepard shared with you, but we launched our strategic plan at the beginning of this year. It was a very ambitious plan. And it's landed on 3 major themes. The first was the advancement of world-class science, and I'll describe under there what some of our strategic goals are. The second was to deliver real-world solutions. And the third was to provide an opportunity for all. And as you can see under each of these different themes, we also had a number of goals. Under the advanced world-class science theme, our goals were to develop shared resources, and you'll be hearing about this in the upcoming board meetings. In fact, we have in the October board meeting, we'll be sharing a concept and seeking board approval for the concept plan of the shared resource labs. and to build knowledge networks, which is a big part of what we've been working on. Our scientific programs team has been working on this, and of course, in the near future, we'll be ready to share more information about that. Under the deliver real world solutions theme, we had a number of different goals, and I'll go into more detail about some of these today. To advance therapies to marketing approval by overcoming a lot of hurdles and barriers, to create a manufacturing partnership network, which again is a major opportunity for advancing therapies, to expand the Alpha Clinics network, which had already been established by Prop 71, but to continue to expand that, and to create community care centers of excellence, which I'll discuss a little bit more when I get to it. And finally, for providing an opportunity for all, we set an ambitious goal of both building a diverse and highly skilled workforce. You saw some examples of that when Kelly shared her slides just earlier, and to deliver a roadmap for access and affordability, which is a very innovative, but also a very challenging road ahead. You heard from Chairman Thomas's slides some of our progress so far in terms of the numbers of awards that we funded thus far, but this is a snapshot of the amount of money that we've invested in each of those different pillars, as you can see, both in total, what we funded to date and what we funded through the Prop 14 era. And I also just wanted to note that there has been a specific investment of 23 awards totaling $88 million in the neuro space, which, as you heard Chairman Thomas mention, is an important part of the Prop 14 language, where there's an earmark specifically for diseases related to the brain. And we're hoping that with not just our funding pillars, but also with additional other strategies which are still in development, that we'll be able to really make a mark and move the needle in the neurodegenerative space. But how do we do this? How do we get therapies to advance, and how do we help not just the academics, but also industry to continue to advance their goals and hopefully get therapies into FDA approval? We do that in a number of ways. I'm just listing 6 here, and I'll give you a snapshot of a few of them. We de-risk a lot of programs. You heard some examples of that when Dr. Cadike gave you some of the examples with Spina Bifida. We serve as a reliable funding resource, and I think this became very clear, at least in the Prop 71 era initially, when there was limited funding for human embryonic stem cell research. But even today, we at Serum are able to serve as that reliable resource, regardless of what happens with other areas of funding. We know that we have this to support our science. We bridge the valley of death, and I'll tell you what this is in case you're not familiar with it. We are now going to be creating a manufacturing network, a network of our Alpha clinics, which is going to continue to expand, and of course, increasing access to our clinical programs through a number of different ways. And I'll tell you more about those. So one of the advantages of Serum is that we are also able to attract a lot of industry investment. And this is a really important step, as you'll see on the next slide as well, because what it enables is for additional money, not just the funding that Serum invests into the advancement of therapies, but money from the industry and partners to continue to advance therapies in some phases of the drug development life cycle, when money becomes a really big issue and it's a necessity. And that kind of industry investment has been really critical and important for the advancement of a lot of these therapies. We've enabled the spin out of 50 companies from academia, which really tells you how much of an imprint or impact that's had. Over 50% of Serum-funded clinical projects are partnered with industry, and that again, gives it's a stake that they have in all of this, which is really important. And 6 portfolio companies have gone public, and 4 were acquired. So they're making great strides in this area. Excuse me. SERM also, and I think this is an area that really SERM has been able to make a big impact in, has been funding the area of the valley of death, if we can think about it that way. So for those of you who may not be familiar with this, this is the idea of translating basic science, or what we call bench, all the way to bedside. And really, you're seeing just one valley of death here. In some images, there are two valleys of death. One is going from basic science to translation, going from truly the bench, understanding mechanisms, molecular biology, basic discovery, all the way to the clinical trial. There's one valley of death there. And then there's a second valley of death when you want to advance through the clinical trial phases. And that these valleys of death really occur for a number of different reasons. Part of it is just translation difficulties. Of course, going from animal studies to humans can have its challenges. But another major component of it can be funding. And this is where SERM has made a lot of effort to try and bridge that gap by providing that reliable source of funding. And you can see some of the examples. Dr. Cadike has already talked to you about the Spina Bifida example, but there are also others, and I've highlighted a couple others here with retinitis pigmentosa and epilepsy, where we've really held their hands and helped these therapies advance through all of the different stages from discovery to a clinical trial. And that's a really important process because it helps also de-risk many of these potential therapies, allowing them to be picked up by industry at the later phases of clinical trials when research becomes really costly. So these are a couple of ways that we've helped to advance therapies thus far, but we're also working on more strategic elements that can help to overcome some of the barriers. And one of those is the development of a manufacturing network. And this is really critical because if you think about again, that translation process going from bench to bedside, even talking about cell and gene therapies, there's a need for scale up. There's a need for manufacturing. There's a need for reproducible manufacturing. And a lot of these can pose as hurdles for people who are going from a small lab setting now trying to deliver these therapies to patients, to many patients potentially. And so generating that manufacturing network and enabling even academics from an early stage to think about how they're going to design or even manufacture their therapies so that they can scale them is a really important component that needs to be addressed. And with a concept plan that we got approved by our board, I believe it was in July, now we're able to generate this network and hopefully be able to connect our academics with manufacturing partners to advance their therapies. The next idea in development, which really is actually going to the board this October as well. There's a lot of things going to the board this month, is an expansion of our Alpha Clinics network. And as I indicated earlier, SERM under the Prop 71 era already established 5 Alpha Clinic networks, which are these medical centers that enable the delivery of clinical trials, FDA regulated clinical trials to patients. And the Alpha Clinics have really been able to successfully accelerate cell and gene therapies. Thus far, they have supported over 105 clinical trials since their inception in 2015. And many of those clinical trials are even industry sponsored. So not even necessarily just SERM funded trials. So this really tells us that there's a need for a place where even industry sponsors can go and really effectively deliver their therapies to patients for clinical testing. So this network is going to be continuing to expand. There's a budget of $80 million that's been set aside for its expansion, and we'll find out in the upcoming board meeting how this money is going to be allocated and to what extent this expansion is going to occur. But the alpha clinics on their own, sure, they can deliver lots of clinical trials in an effective manner, but by putting them together with the community, with community centers, we can really expand the access and engagement of the community, access to the therapies and engagement of the community, and therefore be able to really develop therapies that are not only accessible to patients, but also more valid in terms of the data that they produce. And so a big part of our strategic goal, and this is something that's currently in development in the very, very early phases, is to develop these community care centers of excellence, which would enable future access or further access to not just the therapies once they get approved, but also to the clinical trials, because it's really important for members of the community, diverse members of the community from across California, to be able to participate in clinical trials. And we're hoping that by connecting the alpha clinics and community care centers of excellence, we would be able to enable these kinds of innovative research and expanded access to patients. And in terms of our education, you just heard an amazing, and every time that Dr. Shepard gives these talks, it's always so heartwarming to hear the stories and to recognize the amount of progress that we've had and the impact the impact that we've had on the lives of so many different students who are now successful in their respective careers. But one of the things that we would like to continue to do is to increase the number of on-ramps. What can we do to continue to support the workforce generation, so that there are a number of different ways that students who would not necessarily have access to these kinds of training and education programs would be able to benefit from them. And the COMPASS program that Dr. Shepard discusses, a perfect example of one of those recently launched programs. And hopefully in the future, there will be others that will, again, continue to add these on-ramps and enable a diverse cohort of students and future educators to continue to benefit from these kinds of training programs. And finally, for within that third theme of our strategic plan, if you remember, providing opportunity for all, a big component of that is access and affordability. And this is an area that is in huge development, but we have already made some great strides here. Some of you may know that $15.6 million that resulted from revenue sharing provisions were returned to the state, and they are now in the Patient Assistance Fund that was created by Prop 14. And so this money is going to help enable, again, any roadmap or any future programs that we put into place for increasing access and affordability. And the team at Serum, the medical affairs team, which is a brand new department that was created, is going to help us drive that roadmap, and has already developed a patient support program that we're hoping will continue to expand and increase access and affordability for patients in the future and within clinical trials. And I can't end my talk without addressing another really big element that Dr. Shepard also alluded to, and that is that really one of the most systemic elements of our strategic plan that connects all the dots, that really connects the three themes, is the element of DEI. And we're committed to our efforts in DEI. There are many current and ongoing areas of strategy for how the kinds of programs that we need, the kinds of strategies that we need in order to continue to enhance our commitment to DEI principles. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of some of what we have done thus far and some of what we're thinking about for the future. But in the DISC, TRAN, and CLIN programs, already we have an iPSC repository that has a large number of diverse cell lines, but this can continue to expand. And there has been an addition of key criteria for DEI scoring on our applications, as well as a lot of expansion and diversification of the GWG members. All of these are going to really help to enhance DEI within our advancement of world-class science theme. Under Deliver Real World Solutions, the workforce development that will also train many people in the area of manufacturing in the future is really going to help to draw in a diverse cohort of workforce. And in addition to that, our infrastructure programs for community care centers, which are still in development, and the enhancement of engagement with the community to make sure that their needs are also addressed when developing any kind of innovative clinical programs is going to really help to increase DEI. And finally, in terms of providing opportunity for all, again, Dr. Shepard did a phenomenal job of demonstrating to you that our Compass program has already enhanced, the wheels are in place for enhancement of DEI with that program. And many of the improvements that we're making, even in terms of our reporting and metrics analysis, are ongoing areas of improvement for us to make sure that we're generating the types of data that would educate us, inform us about how we're making progress in DEI and where is there room or opportunity for further growth. And of course, access and affordability programs go without a say. Those are specifically targeted to ensure that there is inclusion, diversity, and equity across all of our clinical programs. And with that, I wanted to thank you for your time and for being here. Happy Stem Cell Awareness Day. And I really hope that you were able to get a, somewhat of a comprehensive overview of everything that Serum has done to date and where we're going for the next 5 years. And I will turn it back over to Kevin.
Great. Mitra, thank you. Thank you so much for that. It was fascinating. You covered a lot of ground. I particularly like the ghoulish Valley of Death slides. I mean, with Halloween coming up, I think it's very appropriate. So I'd like to invite the panelists to come back on. We're going to do some questions now. There was one other thing I wanted to say, Mitra. At the beginning, you apologized for keeping us away from dinner. You're actually keeping me away from something far more important, which is a nice pint of beer. But that's okay. We'll get there. So I think the first couple of questions, the first question would actually, I think, apply to both Lisa and Mitra, which is, what are the remaining challenges to getting more stem cell-based therapies into the clinic and ultimately more safe and effective therapies approved by the FDA?
Well, you want me to start off with that?
Yeah, you start.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big things for stem cell therapies is the manufacturing, getting these are complex products compared to what is traditionally therapeutics like small molecules and antibodies, which are chemicals and or single proteins. These are cells that are composed of many proteins and lipids and all kinds of things, and it's a living product. So we still nevertheless want them to be reproducibly manufactured so that every patient really gets the same thing that has been shown to be efficacious in preclinical studies. And so I think manufacturing has always been an issue. There's been tremendous strides in being able to better characterize cell therapies, at the level of RNA expression and protein expression, and to better understand the products. But that's I think one of the distinguishing features and challenges of cell therapies.
Mitra, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I don't know that I have much to add. That's exactly it. I think the problem is typically with scale up and reproducibility. And in fact, I was just at the meeting on the Mesa today, and Peter Marks from the FDA had a keynote talk where he highlighted specifically the importance of manufacturing. and how important it is that, when you do go, when you go to scale up, you have to really know what it is, what's that final product that you're working with. And that's going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of upcoming cell and gene therapies.
Great, thank you. The next one is probably for Kelly, which is what basic science challenges and investigations still need to be explored?
Oh, there are a large number of basic challenges. When you think about it, the stem cell field is really fairly recent. Human embryonic stem cells were only described in 1999. And while that might seem like a long time to some of you, it just seems like a blink in my life. It all happened after I finished my graduate education. So it's an area that's grown enormously, but there's so much more to learn. So the nice thing about the stem cell technology now is that we can actually use human pluripotent stem cells to create disease models and try to replicate diseases in the laboratory setting, where we can actually start testing hypotheses. So understanding the mechanisms of disease is one area of need. There are many diseases, especially in the neurodegenerative space, where we don't even know the fundamental causes of the disease at the molecular level. And being able to isolate skin samples from patients who suffer from these diseases, create pluripotent stem cells, and then being able to use those cells in the lab to produce neurons and other specific cell types, it's possible to start testing these hypotheses and getting some information. There are also a number of challenges around delivering therapies that we do develop to specific cells. How do you get, for example, in a gene therapy, how do you make sure that the gene that you deliver to a person goes to the right cell and not to a different cell? If you deliver a gene to the wrong place, you can create problems, right? This is one of the reasons that testing safety is so important in any new groundbreaking type of therapeutic modality. So another interesting thing that's an area of basic science, really, it relates to the manufacturing challenge you just heard about. There is a lot of expertise for drug manufacturing out there because for many, many years, the primary types of drugs that we have in our arsenal for diseases are chemicals. Or more recently, in some cases, we have some successful biologics drugs, which are antibodies or proteins. But in order to create chemicals, you can synthesize them in a lab. Chemists can do that, right? And in order to create antibodies or biologics, you can grow up cells and then kill the cells and purify the antibodies out of them. But for cell therapies, we're talking about a living drug. The cells are alive. They can change. They can be, depending on how you grow them in the lab, their properties can change. And understanding which cell is in the right place at the right time to do a job is a big area of investigation. So we've made a lot of progress in certain areas of stem cell biology and gene therapy, particularly in the area of blood stem cells and blood-based disorders. But part of the reason is because the basic science where those types of stem cells was first unearthed was in the 60s. And so for a lot of the new cutting edge types of therapies that Serum is supporting, which have great promise, we're in the earlier days. So there's just a lot of things to discover, but there's also a lot of really exciting developments that you're hearing about today. So we have to continue to support the entire spectrum from the early basic research stage through the valley of death, through the clinical trial. And the lessons we learn from our clinical trials actually feed back and inform the basic science that we're doing as well.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. JT, maybe you could take this next one. Does Serum still encourage investigations in both iPSC as well as embryonic stem cell research? JT, you're muted.
I think I'm back. So the answer to that question is we encourage applications for research across the stem cell spectrum, whether it's in embryonic, induced pluripotent, adult stem cell, or whatever. There are different disease mechanisms that cater to potential treatments deriving from different kinds of stem cells. And we, from the very beginning, when a lot of the work was in embryonic stem cells, do not discourage research on any of them. In fact, encourage it. So you'll see if you canvass the portfolio of projects that we funded on our website that it represents the entire range of stem cells in the work that we're funding.
Oh, is Kevin
I
frozen?
think Kevin froze, yeah.
Maybe while he's frozen, I see a question from Nancy Renee here in the Q&A, which is years ago when CERM was just beginning, there was talk of using stem cells in autism, and has there been any work on that issue? And I know for this, from the CERM perspective, we have funded, I think primarily Allison Moultrie at UC San Diego, and maybe I'm not sure about others, but more at the discovery stage. He's using iPS cells as models for autism, so patient-derived cells. And I think, and Kelly, this is in your purview more than mine, the discovery stage. I think he just recently got a new award. Is that right?
He did, yes, for a disorder that is by many considered on the autism spectrum, Rett syndrome. But just speaking a little bit further on this topic, a few years ago, we actually did a CERM Facebook Live presentation on autism and the stem cell angle with that. And Dr. Moultrie was the guest speaker, and I helped a little bit, but it was mainly his show. But we talked about this. So autism is a spectrum, and there are many different things that contribute to it. And in some cases, it's multifactorial, and the contributors are not known. And when we're talking about a stem cell therapy, often the stem cells are used to replace a tissue that's been damaged or missing. And in the case of autism, there's not really damage or missing cells. It's a fundamentally different basis. And so a lot of the work where stem cells have been useful is for understanding the molecular underpinnings of the different forms of autism. And this is where some of the work in our discovery portfolio, including some that's been done by Dr. Moultrie, falls. And also in our iPSC repository, we have a collection of autism-specific stem cell lines that were created from individuals with autism by taking their skin samples or blood samples, reprogramming them into induced pluripotent stem cells that are now personalized cells that carry any genetic contributors to the underlying autism. And then those can be used to create neurons in the dish. This is the only way to study human autism neurons without taking a brain biopsy, which is not something you do to people, right? Not unless they have a brain tumor and there's some other reason to open up somebody's head. So the stem cells have been extremely useful for trying to get down to what is happening in different forms of autism, finding the differences between different forms, identifying new causes, identifying new contributing factors. And that's the beginning. Once you know what's different about a cell harboring mutations that contribute to autism, that's the starting point for figuring out what a potential treatment could be. And the potential treatment might not be a stem cell therapy. It might be some other type of therapy, but the stem cells are playing a role because they're helping you understand the basis that needs to be treated.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. We have a question from Bob Ladd, who says, regarding Dr. Hushman's work, are California manufacturers prioritized for gene therapies?
Well, I don't do the work. The scientists and the applicants do the work, but we are a California agency, and so we need to fund any of our funding programs need to be within California. Of course, they can collaborate with others outside of California, but we only fund California institutions.
Right, great. A question from Kerry Mulwee, which says, great session, many exciting developments on serious diseases. But what about the low-hanging fruit, like just reproducing cartilage in worn-out hips and knees, which affect hundreds of thousands, millions of people, actually, as an example? Where are these treatments? Anyone?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And actually, there's a lot of activity in that space right now for in the stem cell space, as well as gene therapy approaches. And we have funded some of those embryonic stem cell derived cartilage progenitors in the past. They haven't gone to the clinic yet. And we actually have another one that's at the IND enabling stage now out of USC, Frank Petrogliano's work. And we actually have quite a bit of interest of people who haven't applied yet, but who are interested in coming in. So I think that is definitely an area that's a huge unmet need that's really affecting many, many, many patients. It's, you know, it's not fun to go through a knee replacement surgery. And so I think that's an opportunity there for a stem cell-based approach.
Right. As a person who gets a lot of the calls and emails, I think I get more calls and emails about hip replacements, knee replacements, regrowing cartilage than almost any other thing. Actually, one of the other things that I do get a lot of emails and calls about is what.
Oh, Kevin's connection.
Oh, no, and I really wanted to know what it was.
I think he actually wanted to get a sip of beer, and so that.
Well, one thing that's exciting about the project you just mentioned, Lisa, was that it started as a basic biology grant at Serum many, many years ago. So it's an example of something that's progressed from the bench and is well on its way to the bedside. It still has a long way to go, but it's made a lot of progress already. So
That's right. Yeah, embryonic stem cell derived chondrocytes in a matrix and for cartilage damage. So, you know, we have high hopes that maybe this will get in the clinic in the next couple of years. Let's see, I'm looking at the other questions.
Yeah, I think, Lisa, you can take the J-site question as well.
Let's see, is Serum still working with J-site for retinitis pigmentosa cell therapy? Yes. And I know that they are, they're getting close towards, you know, they're pretty advanced there. They've had some pretty exciting results from their trials right now. And they're still moving forward. I don't know exact timing for getting it to an approved therapy, but they are still progressing in that direction.
So I see a question about using stem cells to regenerate kidneys. That is something that scientists are trying to do. It's a much more challenging organ to try to regenerate from stem cells because there are so many complex structures that have to interact with one another. And simply differentiating stem cells in a dish and trying to control them going into the kidney lineage isn't quite enough. It needs the right kind of three-dimensional cues and environment. So scientists are exploring things like combining different types of stem cell derivatives with one another under different culture conditions through bioprinting and other ways in an effort to try to do just that. And it's not as far along as some of the other organ areas, but it is definitely an active area of interest. And Serum has funded a few projects where investigators have been attempting to create small kidney organelles in a dish that could be used for various functions.
Thanks, Kelly. I think I'm back. So maybe Lisa, this one was for you. Are there any clinical trials or anything looking promising for people recovering from a stroke?
Yes, actually, Serum has recently funded Dr. Gary Steinberg at Stanford. He's got some neural progenitor cells that can be used in patients well, it's been shown in preclinical models of chronic stroke that they improve the motor deficits. And the clinical trial is starting in patients who have chronic stroke. In other words, they are at least 6 months past the time of the stroke, which is really past the time when you would expect any improvement, natural improvement. And so he's accepting patients anywhere from 6 months up to 5 years past the stroke. And it involves injecting these neural progenitor cells into the brain.
Thanks, Lisa. James Stewart asked, is Serum working with the recently launched National Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Initiative, which is intended to grow domestic? Well, his question just disappeared. Anyway, are we working with them? Any thoughts about that?
Not yet, but this is also a very new initiative, so it doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future and that we can't partner with them. But as of now, no.
Okay. Maybe we'll make this the last question, as my internet connection seems to be fading rapidly, and we're coming up to 90 minutes on the program. So I've been reading about clinics here in the US that offer stem cell therapies for everything from arthritis to Alzheimer's and hip and knee problems.
Oh, no.
Anybody else see that question up there?
Yeah. I think Kevin was probably a good one to answer it. I've been reading about clinics here in the US that offer stem cell therapies for things like arthritis, hip or knee problems. Should I go to them? I think they're talking about sort of the clinics that maybe aren't doing FDA approved therapies.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So this is a huge issue, and it's getting worse by the day, where you get effectively snake oil salesmen out there offering treatments and cures for virtually everything that ails you, virtually all of which are, as Lisa suggested, not approved by the FDA, have not undergone rigorous preclinical work to demonstrate any form of efficacy. And it's basically just a case of, in many instances, these people preying off the needs and hopes of people that are willing to pay lots of money for something that's unproven. And so it's something that the FDA is starting to focus on. They haven't been able to quite get around to a major comprehensive crackdown on these stem cell clinics, but you'll see over time that will increase, as well as it's an issue up in Sacramento because California is home to many of these. And the sort of bottom line here is just please be careful and make sure that you check with doctors who know what's going on, what treatments are available, et cetera, before you go out there and get engaged with any of these.
Great. Thank you, JT. Thank you, Lisa. Well, I think that's all we have time for. And before my internet connection craps out yet again, I'd like to thank the panelists, JT, Lisa, Kelly, Mitra, for being such great experts on all of this and giving such great answers. I'd also like to thank Doug Guillen, Katie Sharifi, and Esteban Cortez for helping set this up and help make this possible. I'd particularly like to thank all of you for sticking around and asking such great questions. And once this finishes recording, it's going to be posted onto our YouTube channel. So if you know anyone who wanted to see it but couldn't make it, direct them there and they'll be able to see the whole thing in its entirety. And with that, I'd just like to